All right, hello everybody. Today we're going to be talking about Kierkegaard's on that dedication to the single individual. Um, honestly, really, it could almost be called "The Crowd is Untruth," right? Because we just keep hearing that refrain over and over again as we're reading this work. The crowd is untruth. The crowd is untruth. The crowd is untruth. And he gives us a definition for what he means by that in this article. In fact, he actually gives us a whole bunch of definitions of why he thinks the crowd is quote unquote untruth. So let's talk a little bit about what he means by untruth, right? First of all, he's not saying that they're false necessarily, but rather what he's saying is that truth that comes from a crowd is not good truth. It's not real truth. In fact, it's almost a little untrue to call it truth. So let's talk a little bit about what a crowd is and then a little bit about how that influences untruth. Crowds are those groups, those organizations, those associations that we use to identify ourselves. So Kierkegaard actually has a whole litany of crowds that he goes through, including religions, political parties. But we could apply it to our modern day senses too. It's not just those. It's also like sports teams. It's also companies. It's also ethnicities, even cultures, stuff like that. Those are all crowds, right? And what we use those crowds for, I've already kind of suggested, is to give ourselves an identity. It's to give ourselves some kind of truth, some kind of way of knowing, some kind of way of experiencing truth. So Kierkegaard really wants to look at a crowd's relation to this kind of truth. What kind of access do crowds actually have to truth? Can a crowd really give you any truth? And obviously Kierkegaard thinks no, right? The crowd is untruth. And if we take a step back and look at some of the examples that we just talked about, it kind of makes sense. How can a crowd, a big group of a bunch of individuals, arrive at a truth, right? How could something like Democrats or Republicans, for example, collectively arrive at a truth? How could particular religions arrive at a truth? It actually doesn't even make sense when you think about it, right? The DNC and the RNC aren't arriving at truths, right? Individuals inside of those organizations are arriving at truths. Different religions. It's not that the entirety of Christianity or the entirety of Buddhism or even the different small sects inside of those examples are arriving at truth. Those crowds aren't actually doing anything, right? They're just a label. They're just a way of understanding where I fit in relation to everybody else. The people that are doing things are just that. They're people. They're single individuals that are working to arrive at truth. Think about it in your own life. Think about some of the most difficult, most profound, most hard-fought truths that you have. What are some things that you really just hold dear, right? And what are some things that you hold dear because you worked hard to get them? Could a crowd ever arrive at something like that? Could a crowd ever really actually grasp that kind of truth? It doesn't really seem like it. It doesn't really seem like it. So, as I said before, since Kierkegaard kind of explains crowds as a way for us to get our identity, as a way for us to understand ourselves and to make choices for ourselves, Kierkegaard thinks that crowds only serve to abdicate responsibility. They only serve to make it so that you don't have to be authentic, so that you don't have to do the hard work to arrive at a truth. Instead, you can just have that truth, that morality kind of just given to you, right? And Kierkegaard believes that having that truth, that morality just sort of given to you is actually maybe the most immoral thing that you could do, right? Being inauthentic in this way, being a fake person, being a person who has just had your identity spoon-fed to you by your association with various crowds, means that you haven't actually taken responsibility for yourself. You've allowed those crowds to define yourself for yourself. And for Kierkegaard, what he thinks we really need to be doing is we need to define ourselves for ourselves. In fact, that's the whole point of life. You know, for Kierkegaard, you're only here for a little bit. You're only here for, maybe 110 years if you're lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. And the whole point, the whole time that you're here is a time spent defining yourself. So essentially, if we could kind of sum up the end of Kierkegaard here, we would say that Kierkegaard believes that everybody, not just you, but everybody has a particular responsibility to create and to be themselves. And that by trying to use groups to help us do this, trying to use crowds to help us do this, we're abdicating that responsibility. We're essentially giving up our life's purpose to some abstract concept that doesn't actually even really exist in the way that you and I actually really exist. All right, well, that's it. I'm excited to hear your thoughts about this. I'll look forward to talking with you guys.